Okay. So it's a pleasure finally to be here and to tell you a little bit about Crossmodal Correspondences, but also as I realised that a number of people here were in Tokyo, whatever it was, 18 months ago for the IMRF meeting there. I want to sort of switch the focus a little bit onto multisensory illusions around food, as well as a little on correspondences to have something different from what we heard before, if anyone remembers other than myself. I think both the illusions in food and correspondences and food sort of fit together for me as a understanding the integration and the cross-influence of one sense on another, and thinking about how those insights can be used in design and in the development of new dishes that might entertain diners and or bias their choices in different directions about the foods that they choose to eat and what they think about what they are eating. And from the correspondences side, I guess the idea is this is the name, sometimes called crossmodal association, sometimes called synesthetic correspondences, synesthetic associations, a whole range of different terms, to capture the idea that we seem to associate features, dimensions, attributes in different senses that will sort of surprisingly go together in the first instance. So no one will be surprised that the woof of the dog goes together with the sight of the dog. But when we find that pitches and colours and textures and tastes and smells go together, that's kind of more surprising, almost synesthetic. And that is the name that many would call a kind of correspondence. Surprising connection or association between the senses that's shared by many people that doesn't give rise to a conscious concurrent, but nevertheless gives rise to processing fluency and can bias perceptual decisions under certain circumstances. I want to think a bit about the sort of correspondences in the context of food, and sort of put food centre stage as one of the areas that maybe we should be thinking more about. Thinking in particular perhaps about the dish you see there, beetroot and orange jelly, illustrating perhaps a correspondence between colour and taste or flavour, though in this case a dish from British chef Heston Blumenthal, and the colours and the flavours have been reversed, because this is really not an orange and a purple beetroot, but a golden orange and a blood red. Golden beetroot and a blood red orange. So the colours, the flavours have been crossed over, and that's kind of the experience that the diners have. Do they realise or not the correspondence at play? And on the other side, I want to think about sort of illusions and their role, potential role in food perception. One might say that the very fact that we all think as if we experience the taste and flavour of food in our mouths is kind of a multisensory illusion or interaction right there, given that most of what we think we taste, we really smell. Numbers coming out at somewhere between 70 and 95%. So that's one illusion that gives rise to the taste experience in our mouth. My interest is what other illusions can we take from the higher, the more rational senses of vision or hearing to play with perception and play with the diner's expectations and possibly also their experience, as in this bikini martini illusion from back in 1973. But in doing this, in trying to put food centre stage in our thinking, that kind of goes against the zeitgeist in a certain way, in that most psychologists, psychophysicists, sensory scientists don't really think about taste and about flavour. Much easier to study the higher senses of hearing and vision, stick people in front of a computer monitor and get on with it. When it comes to food and drink, it's messy, people adapt, they get full up, somebody's got to wash up afterwards, there are allergies and so on. So many scientists seem to just ignore food And yet, as from this quote from Nicholas Curti, a famous British physicist also from Oxford, who maybe coined the term molecular gastronomy, he notes that it seemed to me that while scientists on the whole enjoy good food, and are often expert cooks, they shy away from a serious application of their profession in the kitchen. Could it be that they do not regard cooking as sufficiently dignified to deserve research effort using scientific techniques and methods? He's talking about science being applied to the kitchen, the physics and chemistry of cuisine, but I think the same sort of sentiment could apply to the brain scientists, the psychological scientists, and their seeming aversion to thinking about or using their knowledge in the world of food. And that's kind of surprising to me, I think, at least, because, at least according to some people, maybe our brains have evolved primarily for sort of foraging, feeding, and other things beginning with F, as captured by the eminent J.Z. Young in a conference proceeding back from 1968, with a number of great ideas, I think, in that, about why is it that the brain is so close to the mouth in pretty much all species. And here, noting that no animal can live without food. Let us then pursue the corollary of this. Namely, food is about the most important influence in determining the organisation of the brain and the behaviour that that brain organisation dictates. So we've evolved for finding, foraging and feeding. If within the blink of an eye we can categorise the energy density of foods in the scene and pay attention accordingly, track with our limited mental resources high-fat foods, then it seems sort of bizarre so often to do experiments with boxes and arrows on screens that have no relation to that food stimulus. And here also, if one looks in the neuroimaging data, then the evidence, not my own, but from Wang and colleagues from 2004 in neuroimage shows, I think, the single greatest increase in cerebral blood flow recorded when hungry participants are shown images of their favourite food, when they can smell their favourite food in the scanner, or maybe when the evil experimenter rubs a Q-tip with the flavour of their favourite food across their lips. In this study, I think 24% increase in cerebral blood flow to the anticipation, to the expectation of that food. Much more than real pornography, and much more of an increase than pretty much anything else. So that notion of gastroporn, I think, holds true. As soon as you get to eat your favourite food, brain activity declines. It's all about the anticipation, the prediction, the tracking, and the expectation that really gets the brain going. And as such, I think that notion that we have evolved to use our eyes to make predictions about the nutritional contents of foods makes a sense of a lot of the food television we see, the number of people who cannot help but take pictures of the foods they eat when they go out to restaurants, share on their social networks. And it's something that we've been working on in our own research, both in the lab but also in the restaurant setting, thinking about using correspondences involving the sight of food in innovative and hopefully fun ways for diners. And this is just one example, trying to pick up on the correspondence, a somewhat surprising connection between colour and, in this case, taste. So this is a dish called the foretaste, served at the gastrophysics chef's table in London, at a restaurant there. These spoons are laid down randomly in front of diners, and the waitress says, these are the four tastes. The chef recommends you start with the salty spoon, then try the bitter spoon, then have the sour spoon, and then make sure you end on a sweet note. And you go, but you didn't tell me which spoon was which. How am I supposed to know which is the salty, which is the bitter, which is the sour, and which is the sweet? Well, you have to use your intuition and think about what taste you would expect those four spherified spheres to have. You rearrange the spoons on your table, or we do this online, and we can pick up the consensuality of responses. There are no correct responses here, because tastes do not literally have colours. But we know that about 75% of diners and online respondents will choose this arrangement. The white seems salty, browny black, probably bitter, green sour, and red sweet. And then when you try those spherified balls of taste and flavour, if you get it right, you will enjoy the tasting experience. If you get it wrong, putting it in your mouth and exploding a ball of bitter taste that you thought was sweet, you will have a disconfirmation of expectation. It won't be a pleasurable experience, but it will probably be a memorable one for you. So here, the correspondence between colours and tastes being used in a playful way with diners. But when thinking about these sort of correspondences, often one might say, well, where did you do that experiment and on whom did you do it? And in this case, was it Oxford undergraduates or rich London types? And the answer would be yes. Perhaps a restricted range, not necessarily representative of today's audience, who haven't perhaps been to that restaurant in London, who may have different correspondences from those in other countries. So one important question here is to try and figure out to what extent the surprising connections between the senses hold true across culture, across age group, and so on. And this is something we've been able to test recently at the Cravings exhibition in London, where we had tens of thousands of people coming through the Science Museum to see an exhibition on cravings and how our brain, our gut controls our food behaviour. And we had 27 experiments running around expectations of taste. We couldn't give people food because of health and safety and so on, but they could see food, and they could see, for example, images like this, for which we had about 5,000 people, I think, took part in this particular experiment, just showed drinks, and in this case asked which one looks sweetest. Again, trying to pick up on that correspondence, connection between colour and of taste. And with that sort of size sample, we're able to show that the top right, the pinkish red drink, is the sweetest. Sets the sweetest expectations, not just in Brits, but in the red drink column here, that was the sweetest colour, no matter if you're from Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, Oceania, wherever you come from, red is sweet. So you can say, at least in this case, the correspondence seems to be universal, and there is this connection between pinkish red and sweetness. So that's of use to the chef, catering to international diners. And for a while, and I think 18 months ago at the IMRF meeting here, I brought up this quote from Helmholtz, because this kind of result, the correspondence between taste and colour, seemed to argue against his quote from the end of the 19th century, where he tries to suggest you can't really draw connections or associations between sensations from different senses. And in particular, it talks about the distinction among sensations which belong to different modalities, such as differences among blue, warm, sweet, and high-pitched, are so fundamental as to exclude any possibility of transition from one modality to another, and any relationship of greater or lesser similarity. For example, he says, one cannot ask whether sweet is more like red or more like blue. Comparisons are possible only within each sense modality. But there it is clear, we can't ask people whether sweet is more like red than like blue. And at one level, what I was just doing in the Science Museum with my students and in the lab and in the restaurant was asking people that question. And they did seem to respond consensually, yes, red is sweet. But maybe we're both right here. Maybe Helmholtz is right in the sense that what people were doing was perhaps not making a similarity judgment. They were not saying that red is similar to sweet, but rather that one thing predicts the other. And I guess you can have some sort of causal relation without necessity of similarity being there. And others, in the sort of same vein from now, what was 150 years ago, C.S. Peirce suggested that sight by itself informs us only of colours and forms, and that no one can pretend that the images of sight, e.g. colours, are determinate in reference to taste. And maybe he's right too, and yet there is the consensual response. And one that, in recent work from Saluja and Stevenson down in Australia, they've been asking Australian students, giving them different tastings, asking them to pick a colour, giving them different intensities, weak, medium or strong intensity, and seeing how the colour correspondence varies. And then asking the subjects for a rare time, Why did you make that choice? Why did you say that red was sweet? So they find the same correspondences that I've shown you already. They also find that more intense tastes are matched with more saturated colours. So there's an intensity correspondence there too. And that when asked, people, some of them have no idea why they made that choice, but at least a half say either that they sort of think in memory of exemplars of red things and decide whether they are sweet or not. And for a few people, they use kind of an emotional, what I feel about the colour, if I feel the same thing about the taste. If I like sweet taste and I like red, that's why I put them together. They have the same sort of emotional feel or tone. So I think this correspondence is, we need to think about them carefully, that they're not determinant of taste, and that associating red with sweet is not the same as saying that they are similar, perceptually speaking, just that one predicts the other. And that in a way is very different from the case that we see of smell and taste correspondences, because they're smells that are paired with taste, such as vanilla, being paired with sweetness in Western cuisine, that as we grow up and as we experience vanilla, not only does it come to be associated with sweet taste, but it also, vanilla smell itself becomes sweet. Vanilla pods themselves, of course, bitter to taste, but between smell and taste, the smells that are associated with tastes do become more similar to them perceptually, in a way that colours do not become perceptually similar to the tastes that they predict. So correspondences in both cases, but importantly different, perhaps, in the mechanism. Now we can take that correspondence, sort of saturation to intensity, and take it from the world of taste to the world of fragrance, say, about 70 to 95% of flavour. And here just one example of that from work from the design school in Milan, where we had people pick up hand washing solution bottles, 12 bottles there. You had to pick them up, unscrew the lid, sniff the contents that had either 3 or 7 drops of dragon's blood fragrance, and then rate the intensity of the fragrance and how efficacious you thought that would be as a hand cleaner. You can see we have from white to pink to fully saturated red. What you can't see is that half the bottles had a little weight hidden in the bottom. So there were light bottles and physically heavier bottles. But all we were asking was about the fragrance intensity. But if there is a correspondence between saturation and intensity in taste, it might not surprise you to find that people rated the fragrance from the fully red bottles as more intense than from the pink or the white bottles. Not only that, they also rated the fragrance as more intense when the bottle itself was heavier. So increased weight corresponding to increased fragrance intensity. And those two correspondences between saturation and weight combined so that the fully saturated heavy bottle, that gave rise to the most intense fragrance and the most efficacious seeming hand wash solution. Maybe the designers know that already. Maybe that's why all perfume bottles are heavy in glass when they no longer need be so. That weight in the hand, adding value or perceived intensity to the contents within. But another example of correspondences at work, finding a relation and then looking for a cross-modal influence, a surprising influence of weight or packaging, saturation, colour on fragrance intensity. Another of the correspondences that have attracted a lot of attention recently is perhaps a more surprising one between shape and taste. And while I can point to objects in the world like strawberries that are red and sweet and limes that are green and sour, tastes don't so obviously associate with any particular shape. Drinks take the form of the receptacle in which they are poured, and yet we do seem to show almost as strong, if not stronger, correspondences between tastes, flavours and aromas and textures and shapes, such as the booba and kiki that you see on the top. The booba and kiki shapes that you see at the top, or the sound symbolic words maluma and takiti, tuki or lula, and in much of our research, sort of trawling for these shape-taste correspondences. We'll just give people or ask them to imagine tasting still and sparkling water and putting a mark somewhere on the line that matches your taste experience. Do the same thing for ripe brie cheese and cranberry juice. Is brie more maluma or more takiti? Or for a Malteser, kind of a crunchy chocolate ball, or a caramel nibble that melts in your mouth. Is it more lula or tuki? Might seem strange, might seem silly, but with no more than 10 people, you can pretty much guarantee significant results that most people will associate carbonation with angularity. They associate bitterness with angularity. They associate sourness with angularity and with asymmetry. Brie is more maluma, cranberry juice is more takiti. Just sort of feels right together. They belong together without necessarily being similar. So this from 2011, but this too, the shape of taste, has made it onto the menu now in London too. And this is the Buba Kiki dish served at the gastrophysics chef's table that will be laid down, 2 half plates, one comes and then the other half of the plate comes thereafter. And from the shapes, maybe from the colours, but certainly from the taste, the textures and the mouthfeel, Buba is on the left, the rounded, the dumplings, the creamy, the soft tastes and textures, and the angular shapes, the fish with some lemon juice and sharp apple underneath, or rhubarb, is very much more kiki, but hopefully diners who come to the restaurant through eating the dish and having to make a judgment which is Buba and which is kiki, feel the correspondence as they are eating and wonder to themselves, where did that correspondence come from? Can I point to objects in the world that are angular and round? Are lines, I mean, they're very angular, they're very kiki, but they're round. So that's not the source of the correspondence. Or is it something about our taste experience over time? That maybe sharp tastes come on in experience rapidly and go off almost as rapidly, whereas sweet tastes, umami, comes on gradually in our experience, lingers and fades slowly, more rounded, if you will, compared to the sharper onset and offset of taste of sour. Maybe that's the basis. We're not quite sure as yet, but already the chefs and in some food companies are using these correspondences in their work to play with diners' expectations, or even to make some use of all those 3D printers that they have for food now, and which no one quite knows what to do with. Wonderful technology, you can make beautiful shapes, but why are we doing it? That question hasn't often been answered satisfactorily. But to our way of thinking, if round is associated with sweet and angular is associated with bitter, then when you see those chocolates there, your brain's probably making a prediction that the rounder, bubbly shapes up there on the top left, that looks a little sweeter than the angular kind of cube form in the middle of the screen. That's the expectation, at least, I imagine. And in work with a Belgian chocolate maker, Dominique Passunet, who runs the chocolate line in Belgium, he's made these semi-spherical and 7 angular-sided chocolates in the middle there. And in his chocolate shop, we've been showing these chocolates to consumers, asking them, which of those looks sweeter to you? And the answer, the round ones. People confirm to expectation. They expect it to be sweeter. And yet, when we first gave people chocolates, the round and the angular, saying, if you expect it to be sweet, maybe it will taste sweeter to you, we were sadly a little disappointed that people said, no, they just taste exactly the same. So here at the top, expectations of sweetness differed. Angular being expected to be more bitter and less sweet and less creamy. But when they actually came to taste the chocolate, we found no effect of shape. What's gone wrong? The expectations were biased, but the perception was not. And it turns out in this case, we used a very not at all bitter chocolate. So the tasting experience was very different from that which the subject expected. And if you taste something that's kind of way off your prediction, it seems that you kind of ignore these subtle correspondence cues and just go with your taste experience. But when we repeated the experiment and now made sure that the chocolates that the subjects tasted were pretty close to what they expected they would taste like, then we did find a significant influence of the shape on the taste. And that, I think, helps to explain why, in the English supermarkets at least, companies like Rose's Chocolates and Cadbury Dairy Milk Chocolate have changed the form of their chocolate over the last couple of years, making it rounder, and consumers have been complaining that they've made it sweeter. Mondelez International are in the press saying, we did not change the formulation of our chocolate, all we changed was the shape. But if the shape changes the taste expectation and the taste experience is not far off what you expected, then this might be one way of adding sweetness without the calories. But it's going to be a tricky domain to play with. So one could think a natural follow-up would be, say, okay, if I'm packaging foods for the supermarket now, what shape? I mean, more and more products we use have transparent windows because they connote freshness and quality. People will pay more. And now something like 70% of products in British supermarkets have transparent windows. And we can play with the shape, the position, the size. So you can sort of see what we've been up to here. We've got very angular windows, we've got round windows, we've got booba-shaped windows in our breakfast cereal, or kiki-shaped windows. In this case, it doesn't make a difference, the shape of the window, but perhaps here, this isn't really the shape of the object that you're seeing. It's kind of a window through which you see the object behind, and so there may be a figure ground difference going on. But we can certainly get the effect sometimes with the chocolatier in his chocolate shops, or with, back in the Science Museum, serving people jelly beans, sweet sour jelly beans, from a bowl that had a sign either saying, eat me, in angular typeface. Others got to taste the same jelly beans, but from a bowl with a sign with a rounded, a sweet-looking typeface. And we find a significant difference. Those who ate from the bowl with a sweet typeface rated the jelly beans as sweeter than those from the angular, bold typeface. And here, one of those sort of things that pretty much everything we read comes in a particular typeface. Pretty much everything we read, and yet if you can count the number of psychological studies of the impact of typeface on 3 or 4 hands. It's there, it's fundamental whenever you read, but it's kind of bypassed the sort of psychological investigation. But I think you can take a lot of the work from the shape symbolism and apply it to typeface design, which we are doing with typeface designers in London. And finally here, we've looked at correspondences of colour, of saturation, of shape, of weight, but also of texture. And this, a table set up at a sommelier's conference in Barcelona in April of this year, where we had 200 sommeliers, wine producers, wine writers, wine experts of various descriptions, tasting a wine from a black tasting glass. And on the left side of the table, you can perhaps see the sandpaper. And on the right side of the table, we have velvet. And people had to rate the sweetness of the wine, the acidity, the tannins, and the pleasantness, while simultaneously either rubbing sandpaper or rubbing velvet. We look in the magazines and you see wine being advertised with velvety smooth, for kind of many red wines. And indeed, when you're feeling velvet, that does bring out the sweetness of the wine and the pleasantness, whereas when you're rubbing the sandpaper, you kind of get a negative sensation, transference, if you will. The wine tastes less sweet and less pleasant to you. And this works both in social wine drinkers but also in wine experts. And again, I think it's kind of the correspondence that maybe tannins in a wine, the astringency of an overbrewed tea, kind of corresponds with rougher textures with sandpaper, where sweet and silky kind of go together. And if you can determine the correspondence, then you can incorporate it in the design of wine glasses, of plateware. And this is something that sort of sounds bizarre and modern perhaps, but isn't certainly. Because if you go back to the 1930s, you can find F.T. Marinetti, the Italian futurist, in his futurist cookbook, was already having dinner parties where people would be invited to come wearing pyjamas of different materials, velvet, sandpaper and silk, and you would eat without the aid of knife and fork, just burrowing your face into the plate as you felt your neighbour's pyjamas, to see whether the texture and the textural differences would change the taste. He thought it did. He called it syntactilismo at the time, as well as syn-olfactismo, this sort of synesthetic, surprising connection between textures, sense, and touch. But I think today, 80 years after Marinetti, this understanding is becoming of increasing interest to the designers, to the plateware, to the glassware, to the cutlery manufacturers, to the chefs, to the restaurateurs, and to the advertisers, picking up on these surprising connections and using them to change the taste of wine, of whiskey, and beyond. And while the futurists are primarily sort of a movement that started and was popularised in Italy, I've come across one Italian futurist who published a manifesto in Japanese 1921, Hirato Renkichi. I don't know if anyone has heard of him or knows what happened to him thereafter. His early manifesto in the Japanese newspaper is all about movement and action, but I sort of wonder whether he may have followed through, as the other futurists did, thinking about food or not, who knows. But the sort of things you'll see nowadays in the journals, but also in the restaurants and in experience design, are 3D printed cups like this, a rounded one on the left, a more angular shaped cup on the right. The inside of the cup is the same, and yet the left cup will make mildly sweet drinks taste sweeter to you. And it can't be about the physical chemical properties of the flow patterns, because the liquid is doing the same thing. It's only the outside that has been changed. All this from our own work with Neff Kitchens and Japanese pottery maker Reiko Kaneko, working in the Midlands in England, 3 plates built on the correspondences research to hopefully accentuate different tastes. We have a sweet dessert bowl on the top left. It's round because round is sweet. It sort of semantically perhaps matches a raspberry a little bit. It's also pinkish white, the sweetest colour of all, and by combining the shape, the texture and the colour, we hope that we can make desserts sweeter. We have a bluey white seafood dish, salty, the white and blue, the 2 colours of the sea. And this is my favourite, textured bowl that brings out the gingeriness and pungency of food. It's not just the tannins in wine that are associated with sandpaper, but next time you find yourself with a spare bit of sandpaper, get a ginger biscuit and try the ginger biscuit, or in this case a Thai green curry with sandpaper roughness underneath, and it really does accentuate the pungency. It shouldn't, but it does in a way that I think Marinetti and his colleagues realised long ago. Okay. Yes. Enough on correspondences. What about illusions in the mouth? This is one of the classic, of course, multisensory illusions discovered by accident. The McGurk effect. Not sure whether one of the most subjectively convincing illusions. I've been watching this face. This from Vicky Bruce exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery back in 1998, I think. I've been watching this for 20 years, and I still hear different things when I move my gaze from the lips on the left to the lips on the right. I know I'm being fooled, but I can do nothing about it. It's a very powerful illusion. There's been our sort of hope and aspiration. Think, could we do something similar in the mouth? To have a flavour that changed when you moved your eyes or did something else. Wouldn't that be a sort of bizarre and wonderful experience, interesting at least, to take the McGurk effect and do it in mouth? Can we do it, or are there ways in which smell and taste are fundamentally different from the higher senses of hearing, in vision, in terms of their attentional capacity or switching ability? I think, however, it turns out the pursuit is of of interest. And for us, we haven't really done any McGurk experiments. We just use them for demonstrations. What we have done a lot more of is kind of the rubber hand illusion, another of the subjectively very powerful illusions that with no more than a couple of seconds stroking and a joke shop rubber arm, I can convince you your arm is somewhere else than it really is in most people, and your arm may take on those sort of rubbery properties of the joke shop arm. So showing a visual dominance of proprioception and tactile perception. And can we do something similar with flavour? And this is what led us, I think, perhaps after my last trip here, because I've never thought of eating tongue before. I think the highlight of my trip, one of the highlights of my trip last time was the eel restaurant and being taken out for dinner to a beef tongue restaurant. That's the main course, this big long tongue. It stayed in my mind, and I've been wondering whether we could do a butcher's tongue illusion. Get the arm, but could we give you an out-of-mouth sensation of taste by having you stick your tongue out and using a mirror box? And it works. So you just go to the joke shop, or go to the market, get yourself a beef tongue. A little apparatus like you see here. We have a subject with their tongue out, like so. A mirror and the butcher's tongue, or a joke shop tongue, ahead of their own body. And then with a Q-tip, we can stroke your tongue and stroke the butcher's tongue. And within a few seconds, the majority of people have the experience that what they're looking at out there is their own tongue. It seemed as if the Q-tip touched me in the location where I saw the tongue being touched, significantly higher with synchronous stroking than asynchronous. It seemed like I could move the tongue I was seeing significantly higher with synchronous stroking. So it's just a kind of straight transfer of the rubber hand illusion to the mouth, to the tongue, to another body part. So in one sense, not that exciting, but in the other, allowed us then, in those subjects who experienced the butcher's tongue illusion, to then start dropping tastants, squeezing lemon juice onto the tongue that you see in front of you, that you believe to be your own, but is in fact the butcher's tongue, while we put water on your own tongue. And for some people, they're convinced they can taste the thing that they see being dropped onto their tongue, even though it was water on their own. A real kind of magic in a way, I think. And it's one way in which you sort of take flavour or take taste experience out of the mouth. What else have we tried in this space? We'll be looking at illusions on the plate and their impact on taste sensation. Some nice little sort of soy sauce plates you can buy now that will show the what's that, triple necker cube and the other illusions as you pour the soy sauce into them. But in our own work, we've been focusing instead on classic old Gestalt images like this kind of example of emergence that are in all those textbooks from decades gone by that look like nothing until you see that it's a dog sniffing the grass with its face pointing away into the middle of the screen. And sort of interesting on the one hand because you don't see a leg and say, okay, I can see a leg, but what is it connected to? You see the whole thing emerges in an instant together at once. And interesting also that once you have seen the dog, then your brain has changed, and even if you don't see this image again for decades, as soon as you see the picture, you see the dog. So there's been some sort of switch there. And we wondered if there's something analogous in the world of flavour. I'm tasting a wine, I'm not quite sure what it is, where I had it before, and then it just comes together. There I was on a sunny vineyard somewhere in France, and it must be a bottle of so-and-so and so-and-so. So I think the textbooks are full of these amazing illusions. You can't eat them, you can't smell them, but what would happen if you sort of translated that into an edible form? And so this is the illusion, one of the illusions I showed to Chef Joseph Youssef of the 4 tastes we saw earlier, and of the Booba Kiki plate. He went away, thought about it, and came back with this. An example of edible emergence on the plate. This is called the Picasso dish. Sort of a beautiful bit of gastro-porn in its own right. You can imagine Instagramming that and sharing it on social media. With sort of beetroot stenciling and a bit of duck. And a dish with sort of a message about consumption and changing people's food consumption. And the chef will say, Picasso had the famous line that every act of creation begins with an act of destruction. He was an artist, and I was as a chef, I'm kind of an artist too. and I have to destroy the animal in order to make a beautiful dish like this in my act of creation, and then he will destroy my creation in the act of savouring the flavours. The first thing I've got to do is go and catch the duck. And this is what you hear in the restaurant. And out comes your dinner. So it's using sound in an interesting way. People sort of laugh and feel a bit uncomfortable. But that's kind of the point of the dish for the chef. There's only one meat course in a 9-course menu. And if you don't want to know where your animal came from, what happened to it, well, don't eat it. And so he's very deliberate in kind of provoking diners to think carefully about their food choices. So you have to sort of laugh and feel a bit uneasy. And then he'll ask, okay, out come the plates, and can you see anything in the plate? What can you see?
Duck.
A duck. No. Well, there is duck on the plate. But you can't see the duck on the plate. Can anyone see on the right-hand side of the plate a famous person? The cue's kind of on the left side of the plate, of the table, the dish. It's called the Picasso dish. Hint.
Picasso was it?
Yeah. You can't see it. You can't see it. It's just splotches of beetroot, nothing more. But then if I take away the food and put the other half of the face, hopefully you now can see Picasso's head, sort of bald head here, 2 eyes and nose, the chin, I think. So when we first served this dish in the restaurant, only 4 out of 100 diners could see Picasso. By the time they'd finished the dish, 96 could. And you could hear going around the room, going, I get it now. And so it's got a nice dish. And once you've seen Picasso, I think it's kind of hard to unsee him. And you can't believe that you could not have seen it before. And when other people say they can't see Picasso, they have active emergence in edible form. The other one that's sort of running currently, again, taking famous visual illusions, this Jastrow's duck rabbit. And if ever a bistable percept was chef-friendly, this is probably it. And again, shown to the chef. Could he make something out of this? Does it have a sustainability message? Yes, it does, because we should be eating more ducks. So he made a dish of duck and of rabbit. They pair well together, and they're sustainable. We should eat more of it. We put it online to try and find the optimal orientation of the duck rabbit in order to have diners debating. Do you want somebody to say, if everyone saw a duck, you wouldn't know what was going on. You want half the people to see duck, half the people to see rabbit. So here are the images we put online of the early version of the duck rabbit dish, and just a quick, few hundred people, 10 cents a person. What do you see? Duck rabbit. And that revealed when the beak or the ear is horizontal, it's got to be a duck. When the pointy bit goes up by 20 degrees, that's got to be the ears of a rabbit, more or less. So there are certain orientations that are optimized for discussion at the dining table. That's where we come in as the psychologists. We have a flavourful combination, and if you were to go to gastrophysics chef's table now, this is how it's actually presented. The duck rabbit in edible form. And again, it's got that sort of sonic component. You're given a scorecard. Do you see duck or rabbit? We have something to... So all sorts of stuff that could be going on here. Does the sound you hear, does that change what you see? You get a kind of cross-modal biasing or priming of the animal. And once diners can see either the duck or the rabbit, are they more likely to taste the duck or rabbit in the dish? And if that's true, when your visual percept changes from duck to rabbit, does your taste perception change? Or not? So we know you have sort of bistability in vision, bistability in hearing, but could we find bistability in flavour? If we can, the chef will love it. My gut feeling is it's not going to work that maybe taste flavour just a bit too slow. There are not enough resources, not enough sort of hypothesis generation going on. So I think what we'll find, and the data is coming in these weeks, is that your visual perception will flip, but your taste experience will stay the same. And we're not the only ones to have tried to find bistable flavour experiences, but they really don't seem to crop up, sadly. Maybe we're doing something wrong, but the closest one gets is something like the ice cream you see on the right here. This is a vanilla and cinnamon ice cream, as trialled at the Fat Duck restaurant, with two of those kind of squeezy ketchup bottles, one with a vanilla pod, one with cinnamon. You're encouraged to taste the ice cream, and you can get both the cinnamon and the vanilla. Then you kind of adapt to vanilla by squeezing the vanilla pod into your nose. Then the ice cream changes its taste to cinnamon. And if you want to flip the flavour back, then just grab the cinnamon squeezy bottle and inject lots of cinnamon aroma into your nose, and then you'll adapt to the cinnamon and the vanilla will come out instead. So you can flip the flavours of foods, but in kind of a clunky, slow way. And I think that's going to be the story. But I think we'll keep trying as we go. And the one other one we're sort of thinking about is also not quite an illusion, but again another sort of popular in some parts of Japanese, the dancing squid. Osaka, the famous restaurant that has the squid that looks like it's alive. Of course, it's not really alive. I think the soy sauce causes muscle contraction and the squid dances and you eat it. Another very Instagram-worthy kind of dish. But there's just something not quite right to many of us about things that move on the plate. And maybe it's like a choking risk to swallow something like that, and so on. But it's just something aversive there that maybe is sort of fun to play with, and where maybe just your local illusion maker might fit in. But here we have some sort of movement on the plate, and what would happen if you put your sushi on top? Your food's not moving, but there's something moving where you're eating, and would that be kind of a negatively valenced sensation? We don't know, but it'll be fun to try. And maybe finally here, there's another nice example. Again, going from sort of the lab research, like the rubber hand, and the mirror box, to food, and the idea here about how to get people to consume less. Well, could we use visual illusions to double the apparent amount of food with a mirrored plate and a mirrored cup? And this from design students working in the Royal College of Art in London. Australian designers have done something very similar. Sure it's going to work, but somebody should test it at least. And there's good literature, published literature on mirror boxes and so on, to see whether this does trick the brain into imagining we've eaten twice as much food as is actually the case. Or is there something fundamentally different about food that we can be fooled about what we see on a screen, we can be fooled about what's out there, but as soon as something enters our body, that's too important a decision to be fooled about. That at least is a claim of Kozer and Zellner and colleagues, who say that orthonasal aroma judgments can be influenced by the colour of the liquid you smell, but as soon as that liquid goes into your mouth, the kind of colour cue is negated in some way, and you focus on those internal sensations. And finally, just Let's leave you with a couple of other examples. This one from work with Katsuo Okajima down in Tokyo, and his team of vision scientists. The kind of augmented reality sushi that they have developed there, and that we've been lucky enough to work with him on. The real sushi on the left, what the diner might see through the headset on the right. This case may be a food that has not much aroma, more texture, maybe one that's ripe for vision dominance. And when the sea is a fish to extinction of our sort of favourite sushi fish, maybe this will give us as good an impression. It'll trick our brains, but in a way that we're happy to be fooled by. You can see the sushi on the right has beautiful veining, beautiful sheen, very complex textures. There are no QR codes, meta cookies, or anything like that. You can bite into the sushi, and the illusion still holds. A kind of interesting place to go. Illusions on the plate, but perhaps with a sustainability message or something that will be relevant as various ingredients become no longer available. And look out there, especially in the newspapers now, you'll find more and more examples like this of the mirror plate or the augmented sushi or cookies, or this from Singapore, Ranasinghe last year, the Vocktail, the idea of a flavour-changing cocktail that you could send over the internet. It's a kind of digital taste. The person at the other end of the line has to be drinking something, but with a colour-changing LED and an electric taste strip around the rim. Maybe you can induce a sour sensation, and the colour will make you think you're drinking something different. Again, I think experiments to be done for the psychophysicist, for the gastrophysicist, to determine whether these solutions do work, and if so, for how long, whether we can take the insights from the higher senses about the correspondences, whether we can take the illusions that operate in hearing and vision and apply them to the lower, baser chemical senses or not. And I think in many of these cases, however, the results turn out, it's interesting on the one hand for the chefs to do new things with their diners, and on the other hand, from a theoretical point of view, to say either yes, the chemical senses are similar in kind to the higher spatial senses, or no, they're fundamentally different in the way in which they perceive and think about the world. So thank you for your attention.